For Brampton North has the floor.
I was raised in the city of Brampton. I attended its schools, played in its parks, and made my closest friends there. And it is where my family has chosen to make our home. I know firsthand how vibrant and full of promise this city is. And I believe it reflects the true potential of Canada from coast to coast to coast. I stand before you today, a woman, a mother, a wife, and a proud daughter of immigrant parents. For me, it is both an honor and a pleasure to support the motion on the address in reply to the speech from the throne. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shaz and I'm the founder of HOPCP Television. Today we're going to be interviewing Ruby Sahota, who's a local MP for Brampton North. Akeen Jarrett, our host, is going to be asking a series of questions regarding our youth, schooling, education, jobs, and what we should expect during this pandemic. So thank you for watching. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the series. Take care.
So, with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, especially when it comes to youth, and with Brampton being one of the youngest cities in Canada, what would you say youth could expect when it comes to necessarily entering the job market again? Because personally speaking, I know that it's been a little bit difficult for me, especially looking for and waiting to get back out there.
Yeah, I wish I could say that that people would have an easy time getting back into the job market or starting into the job market for the first time. That's just not the case. It's not going to be easy, but not that it ever really is. So in terms of what we can do as a government, we're trying to create more opportunities, recognizing that it's not going to be an easy time. So it's difficult to say, depending on what sector somebody's trying to get into, what type of career or field that they're looking for. I mean, some jobs are in the abundance right now, and some jobs are very hard to come by. So if you want to work at a grocery store, for instance, the grocery stores are extremely busy and busier than they once were. I was just talking earlier to an association for manufacturers and exporters, and they're having a hard time in food manufacturing and the drink and beverage sector as well. They're having a hard time retaining employees, and they actually, I believe generally they have a 10% deficit right now. It's much higher than that, and so they need employees, but there's the banking sector is extremely busy right now as well, but we have created a source for young people, and that's the jobbanks.ca. So you can go on to that to take a look. We had increased just yesterday. The Prime Minister did announce again that there's another 10,000 jobs increase in the Canada Summer Jobs Program. So this Summer Jobs Program is created for young people up to the age of 30. That's an expansion that we recently, just last year, applied to the program, because previous to that I was realizing, and a lot of MPs were giving feedback saying that it wasn't really fair how restrictive the program was. It was only for students that were in between semesters, and I really felt that students that had just graduated also needed a helping hand to be able to get employment. And so this program is not necessarily something that funding that is given in a direct way to students, but what happens is that employers are given funding based on how many students they're willing to hire. So right now what's happened to this program is it generally creates about 70,000 jobs, and now with the new increase it'll be around 80,000 jobs for the year. Employers that were not for-profit employers would get 100% of the students' funding, but because of COVID-19, what we've done is the private sector only used to get 50% of the students' funding through this program. Now they too are also getting 100%. And so that's really incentivizes an employer to hire students, to hire young people, because why wouldn't you? I mean, if you can get money from the government to pay for your employee, that's free help for you. And so in a way, we're trying to help businesses also be able to, you know, bring down their fixed costs, and employees are a big cost for businesses, and at the same time helping young people get experience. Another announcement that was just made yesterday was about the grants program. I know this isn't directly related to finding work, but it's volunteerism in the community, and through volunteerism, you can potentially get anywhere from $1,000 grant towards your studies to $5,000 of grants towards your studies. And so it's about 100 hours for every $1,000 you get. Now, I understand that may seem like a lot of work for the amount of money you're getting for it, but there are already young people who like to volunteer in the summers, right? They want to give back to their communities. So at least this way, they're not volunteering for free. They're getting something in return for that, for their volunteerism. And we're also at the same time making sure that students that want to go back to school get a helping hand, because I've been hearing from young people as well. And I was just on a town hall call the other day that a lot of people are starting to really sit down and make a hard decision and think out whether they want to go back to school in this coming year. And you know, there's an economic impact to that in many ways. For the secondary, post-secondary school systems, for the colleges and universities, there's a direct economic hit that they take by students not enrolling. But also, we also end up having a gap of, you know, we'll have a year or 2 years where we may not have as many graduates coming out. And one thing we do here is that, you know, in specific sectors, tech sectors, and I would say the skilled sector as well, they have a real lack of employees, and they find that in Canada we don't have enough skilled employees coming out. So if we have less people graduating, we're going to have a big gap in filling that void of jobs. Of course, I do know that, you know, all of this is kind of, the numbers are going to change moving forward, and so we're going to have to pay close attention to what the numbers are and how to direct people into the right sectors. There's a whole bunch of programs. The $9 billion announcement that was made for students about a month and a little while back, early in May. In that, there's a whole bunch of different programs, so I really encourage anybody that's watching this to go on canada.ca and go into the supports, the COVID-19 supports, and that'll link you into individual supports, and through that you can connect to the student supports. And there's a whole list of different ways that students or young people coming out of school can be supported through different programs. And I'm sure the province has some programs of their own, but it's worth taking a look at that. So it's something that we are uber focused on, trying to figure out creative ways. And this is not going to be the end all be all. We're going to continue to try to figure out other ways that we can match talent to job vacancies. It has been something that's been, I would say, a frustration of mine ever since taking on this position, because we do hear from a lot of employers that there's vacancies in certain spots. I mean, not for particular employers, but from sectors in terms of the stats. So I'm not saying you can come to me and I know every job that's available anywhere, but I'm saying that, yeah. But I'm saying there's sectors that will constantly complain about not being able to find their match. And then I hear from young people so often that have great degrees that are coming out of school that are saying that we're not able to find employment. So it's It boggles my mind a little bit about how we can't get this right. And there's a lot of layers and levels involved, and also directly the schools involved as well. They need to reach out, and some schools do this better, right into the employment sectors, and maybe try to connect their students with employers. Some schools are really good at that. Some schools don't care at all. And they really have no co-op programs or no ways of integrating their students into the workforce. And so that is something from all levels I think we need to do a better job on, because I know students really struggle that first few years after getting out and after graduating.
Right.
Yeah.
And it sometimes forces a lot of children, or you go back, I should say, because when you feel as though your education isn't adequate, or you're having difficulty finding work, it's easier to say, you know, maybe I should advance my skill set and, you know, return back to school and continue pursuing that, just because it seems unrealistic finding a job fresh out of school sometimes, especially in my personal friend group. A lot of us have spent days and weeks going over our LinkedIn and going over our resumes to trying to fine tune certain things and set ourselves apart from the rest, and to amend that little gap that we've been seeing amongst ourselves.
I had tons of friends that, you know, got university degrees and then went back for technical degrees at colleges, or, you know, lots of people who did that. And I think that's when they were all surprised that they were ending up having to do that in order to find themselves a position afterwards. So oftentimes I think the best guidance isn't out there, and I don't know, it's tough. Like, obviously we want the best for our younger generations, and we want them to reach for the stars and, you know, get those degrees, and but it needs to be, at the same time, they need to think, I guess, in mind, have a goal in mind, have a job, a career in mind at times. And maybe we're not as good at focusing people in as to where they could work or how they can even start down that path while they're in school. And so we need to do that. We need to do a better job at networking. And I think young people are getting better at that. I'm seeing, I mean, at least the young people I meet, I think they're getting much better than when I was in school, because we didn't, I think we compartmentalized stuff, and we just focused on one thing at a time. And now I'm meeting young people, and they're all over the place. And yeah, they're just amazing at all the things that they're involved in all at one time.
Growing up, I remember thinking, like, it's just, you have to choose a career and just kind of mosey down the path and opportunities will kind of be there. And now the older I get, the more I'm starting to realize, even the platform like the one I'm using now, HOPCP TV, it's necessary for people, youth my age, to actually see real life experience what it is in this particular job sector. You know, if it's art, if it's business, if it's finance, because sometimes they have a preconceived idea that it might be easier than it actually is. And then once down, like, what's worth wanting is worth working for. So it's difficult to sometimes see that in the stew, you know? Yeah.
And a lot of young people are starting their own companies as well, right out of school, and sometimes while they're in school. I mean, we used to hear about those stories, but I think they were, you know, far and few in between. And now I'm seeing them all over the place and hearing about those stories every day. So there's a growing entrepreneurial spirit, I think, amongst young people, or they're also seeing that is the job of the future, and people are just creating their own jobs if they can't find them. So that may be the new thing.
A lot of key changes that they wish were implemented in the jobs they currently were, and instead of hoping for change, I guess they're starting to be the change by starting their own business. So that's wonderful. And I have to say, you answered like 4 questions in that synopsis of an answer. That was wonderful, because I was going to ask you about programs moving forward for youth to kind of look for work, and especially when it comes to finding work in certain sectors as well, depending on the education and depending on employers that don't necessarily want to hire students. You covered all my bases, so I'm going to make sure I have a clear link.
Yeah, so if it's one thing that you take away from this is sit down, do some research on Canada.ca. I think that's the easiest link to go to. It's the easiest one to remember. And that will then link you into other sites. So it's fairly user-friendly. Go on there, spend a little bit of time. There's honestly programs that I wasn't even aware of when I was younger, or even a few years back. And so definitely take a look.
Now, just stepping out of the more youth sphere for a second, with everything going on with regards to safety precaution. Now, I know you are a mother as well. What would you like to see the public start practicing when it comes to safety measures, just for your own peace of mind?
Yeah, in terms of, I think you were also asking, like, for young people as well, there's so much talk, and I was just talking to my son's teacher because today was the last day of grade 1, and so I was just thanking her for all the hard work that they did putting together online curriculum, which I know some of it may have been frustrating for some of us parents trying to teach at home. Some was not as clear as it could have been, but I gotta say, I've also got friends that are teachers and they work their butts off trying to create something that they didn't already have, right? And so these were completely new resources that they put in a lot of effort to teach. And I think going forward, all the school boards are gonna take a hard look at how to move into the new school year. And people are, I think there's talks about hybrid session. There's talks about still online learning for post-secondary and some schools, but I think for the younger grades, and probably every grade really, because I'm hearing from a lot of university and college students as well that everyone learns differently and not everyone is suited to the online learning styles. So I'm hoping that, yeah, me too, me included. I'm more of a visual, and I like to listen to lectures. So, but listening to them just on a video screen is sometimes not as engaging as in real life. And so it is important for us to somehow balance those things, because we don't want this cohort of students to not get the full benefit of their education. But at the same time, as a parent, geez, a lot of parents I'm talking to are scared. They're really scared about sending their kids, yeah, they're scared about sending their kids back to school, back to daycare. And a lot of people are having to make some tough decisions about perhaps, you know, temporarily or permanently quitting their jobs because they just don't feel that daycare is going to adequately meet their needs like it once used to. So I think there's a challenge there for the daycare sector as well to figure out how they're going to incorporate social distancing and all these measures. So I may not be the best person to answer this as to what is going to happen. I think the government of Ontario is more directly involved in the protocols and measures that they're thinking of implementing and putting in place. But I think I envision, and even in Parliament, this is something that we're doing, is we've got a hybrid Parliament taking place where there are some members that are present in person and others that are present virtually. And so everyone gets to participate depending on what their situation may be, but we've got distancing that can still take place. And so we're also figuring out new technologies to use when it comes to voting, and I'm working closely with that. And so in every area there is challenges, and there's a new opportunity as well for innovation and learning in new ways. And so some people may benefit from the new learning and new techniques that we're going to be able to use. We have, I would say, I know I'm veering off the original question a little bit, but we have a unique challenge in the federal parliament, and that challenge is that we come from all over the country to meet in Ottawa. And so it's not about just going to your workplace, you know, which may be in your city. It's very much, you know, we rely on the airline industry to be able to fly us out to Ottawa from every region, all 338 ridings of the country. And so if there was to be an infection that went through Parliament, you know that that infection would then be transported back to 338, you know, ridings across this country, or potentially it could be that bad. And so we have to think about that. And we've always worked in very close proximity. The House of Commons is, you know, a very tight quarters. If you've ever seen it in person, it looks larger on TV, but in person, we are shoulder to shoulder, kind of on top of each other in there. And so we've got to figure out new ways. But we have been, our committees have been going, we've been working every single day since this pandemic started. And if not, we've also realized we can work. There's many ways to work from home and in your ridings that we didn't necessarily give a chance before, because it always seemed like if you weren't in Ottawa, you weren't really working. But I've got to tell you, talking to colleagues from any party, any color, that they've been working harder through this pandemic than ever before, because there's just been so much to do, and so many challenges that we've been facing, and so many issues our constituents have been facing. So it's going to be different, and definitely I have some fears, but I'm very optimistic, I think, when it comes to the health aspect of it. We are seeing the numbers go down, and I'm really surprised, actually, because as we go into reopening and into phase 2 now in the GTA and in Peel, the numbers are still not going up, which is surprising, because we did have a little bit of a spike a little while back, and it seemed like we may never see the end of this. And now, even though we're reopening, the numbers are continuing to go down. So I'm really, looking forward to seeing more stats and research.
Hello?
Differently, right? We're wearing masks. We're trying to kind of keep away from each other, even if we are going out. Like even with the marches, the protests we saw for Black Lives Matter, I went to one here in Brampton as well, and many of my colleagues did. And I would say, so far so good. I've been trying to see if, I would feel any symptoms after the fact. And yeah, and there were a lot of people there, and there was a lot of fear too that this was an important cause, and we had to fight for it, and we had to be there for it. But at the same time, nobody wanted to give the cause a bad name by, the spread of COVID-19 increasing, and perhaps the organizers then feeling that they didn't, do their best to organize these protests. I think they did a fantastic job. The one in Brampton, everyone was wearing their masks. Everyone was behaving. We were together, but people needed to be a little bit more cautious. So I think that inherent behavior in us has changed a little, and that will keep us safe.
I also agree with that, because when you mentioned that the numbers were going down, I actually wasn't surprised by that, just because I've seen on social media a lot of people viewing overseas and taking pointers as to how not to act in public and how their voices be heard while still, adhering to safety measures. So I'm thrilled to hear that, but I'm very curious to see how moving forward we're going to continue to progress, because I don't want numbers to kind of plateau. I just want them to keep rolling down.
Yeah, but what we've also seen, so even though we're optimistic, we have seen that phase 2s are, the countries that are ahead of us in this pandemic, they are facing another wave, and let's just hope it's not as big of a wave, but I think most likely we are going to go through that this fall, this winter, and it's going to be combined with the flu season, so it will be even more difficult and challenging. So we just have to be prepared for it, especially I think people have become more cautious, and people are much more aware than they ever were about how you transfer germs and all of that, which is good and bad. We've definitely become germaphobes. I think for the rest of our lives, this has changed us.
Oh, yes.
Yes. But I think as governments and public health agencies, we've got to be well prepared and ready for that second wave when it hits.
And moving forward, even with the expectation of this, I think it's going to be very beneficial, like we were saying, going into the end of the year, because with the pandemic starting, there's been a lot of high demand to kind of constantly evolve and advance in certain sectors. So I think that moving forward towards the end of the year, hopefully by then we'll be able to retain a little bit of experience that we had to go through from the beginning of the year, and we won't be necessarily making the same mistakes as other countries, or as maybe we were doing in the beginning, like through March. So I have to look forward to that in a sense too. You're going to say something?
There's absolutely lessons learned. I wouldn't say that we've done things perfectly here, but we've learned from it, we've adapted, and I think we're in a fairly good position, relatively speaking. And I think we'll do well. And I'm really impressed by our industry and our different companies that have adapted, that have started to make products, you know, in country, whether it's PPE or other things that we needed here. So to show that companies can scale up and produce quickly, something that is completely, you know, outside of what their regular production lines look like. I think they've learned a lot from that, and we've seen that technology can just change and improve so quickly. And we've also seen organizations adapt to that technology very quickly. And so even from the banking sector, something I've heard is that decisions that would have taken them 5 years to make in the past, you know, going through the pros and cons and weighing through stuff before they switched onto a different system or a different way of doing things, those decisions were made quickly. And government has never moved as fast as they've moved through this pandemic, you know. The CERB, all of these supports that came out, that was unimaginable before, that things like that could happen so quickly. But that is also because people gave us leeway to do that. Opposition parties gave us the leeway to do that by skipping over some procedural, parliamentary steps that are usually required. So I don't think in normal times we would get that type of leeway where the government can just plow on through and say, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing that, because of there being a sense of emergency, of course, right? So that's why regularly a law or a bill would take a year or so to pass. And in this case, you know, we passed probably, you know, 5 different bills within a few weeks, and that's unheard of. And that will probably not remain that way, unfortunately, because we have to respect, you know, the democratic principles. Yeah.
Which is fair. We can only wish that things were that easy, but it's the times that we're living that we kind of have to adapt and adhere to. So totally understand. I'm just going to highlight and make sure that I'm not leaving any questions unturned here. No, you covered beautifully. I don't believe that the housing sector is more your realm with regards to buying, selling, and like renting at the moment. Will you have any information on that? Just because I've also been curious.
Yeah, surprisingly, people are still buying and selling, which is a little shocking to me, because that is something that was definitely a worry of ours. So the mortgage sector is, yes, it is under the purview of the federal government. Tenant, landlord, renting is under the purview of the province. So there have been issues, and honestly, right now, I think our finance departments are monitoring closely as to whether supports need to be provided in those areas. Interest is at an all-time low, so we're hoping that will continue to incentivize people to perhaps not and not completely cool down the market. So so far we're seeing that things cool down just a little bit, but not too much. But I think you can have some experts really weigh in on that. Our focus really lately has been to make sure we haven't been as focused on the markets, although we are going to get more focused on that. But our last few months have been very much, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying in terms of course, finance is always monitoring these things. The Bank of Canada is always monitoring these things. But in terms of a governmental approach, our focus has been supports for people, making sure they can keep that, that roof over their head, making sure they can continue to rent the property that they have, making sure businesses can stay in the commercial properties that they're leasing, and making sure people have enough, food and the adequate supplies that are needed through this time. So our focus has really been that the last 3 months is direct supports. And now that most of those have all been announced, all the different direct supports, and I know some of them suited people and really gave people help, whether it was the wage subsidy, commercial rent assistance, and obviously the CERB, and then the student benefit as well, but it didn't fit all needs, and it didn't get to all people. So we do know that there's still some gaps there. Our focus is really now, though, shifting to how we can spur the economy again, how we can bounce back, how these businesses that were able to survive this pandemic, and we know that there's some that did not survive it, how we can assist those businesses, and how we can look to potential new opportunities where those that are looking to invest now, after this pandemic is over, they have new opportunities to invest in. And so I think this is an exciting time for us. There's a little bit of a restart that we've kind of hit. I think, and even in terms of the green tech, clean technology sectors, I think there's some potential and some new opportunities where we can really focus our energy or efforts into those areas, because we know they're going to bring us good jobs, good, well-paying jobs for the future. And that's what we need. And unfortunately, there's some jobs that are no longer going to be there. And that's the toughest thing. How do you retrain those people? How do you get them back into work? And that's really challenging, and it's really hard. And not from a government perspective. I mean, we can create programs, but from a personal perspective, losing your job, it's tough. And it's tough to console people in that situation and tell them that there's something out there for them and not to give up. And of course, we need to continue working hard so that downturn that people are feeling doesn't impact them as badly as it could by providing them those supports through this time.
Or as permanently, because I know even I was thinking for small businesses, those that aren't able to necessarily bounce back, I was thinking the same thing. How or what are they going to do after the wake of this all? Because if I'm scrambling, I can only imagine that they're going to have, even more of a competition that they didn't necessarily anticipate, going into this pandemic.
Absolutely. I've heard from businesses that were running, especially the food and the restaurant industry has been really hit hard through this pandemic. They're having a very difficult time. I heard from an owner that had, his restaurant for 30 years and just decided it wasn't worth it because of the fixed costs that were that he was having to pay for while he was shut down, that he was just going to say goodbye to his 30-year-old business and start something new, start afresh. He came from a very positive perspective, though. He was looking forward to, what new opportunities life may bring, but that was a decision he made. And he also was telling me he was eligible for some of the programs, but it really is a choice of whether it makes financial sense sometimes to enter into some of those programs. And I got to say, for some, it may have helped, but I have others that just opened their business. They were just starting this year and they weren't able to survive because they were so new, or they didn't really have income to compare to. And so really feel for a lot of people. And there's people that are arguing now that CERB has been extended. There were a lot of people out there arguing that, CERB shouldn't have been extended for 8 more weeks. We're not incentivizing people to go back to work, and we're basically incentivizing them to not work. And I would argue that the numbers that we are seeing in terms of businesses that have completely shut their doors permanently and those that are out looking for work, the numbers don't support that argument, because we've seen that the reliance on CERB has actually gone down. So there are less people on CERB that started off on CERB. So less and less people are taking it, meaning that the people that are getting off of it have either gone back to work or found work, and perhaps their employer is taking the wage subsidy, which supplements, the wages that they have to pay their employee. But then yet there's still those others whose jobs have permanently shut down, and they've got to refigure things out. And I think it would be really unfair at this time, when we know that the job numbers have not bounced back completely, for us to take that support away. So we're still thinking about what supports are going to be needed in the coming days, whether it's going to continue to be those individual supports, or whether there's something we can just do to support the economy so that those jobs are created again.
I know even this morning while going on, was it canada.com or .org?
.ca.
.ca. Mm-hmm. And I did a little bit of research, and I was able to find out a lot more than I thought was out there, especially with regards to the programs and benefiting from the CERB check if you're necessarily using it in the correct way, because I know a lot of people are going back to work, but in certain sectors and certain lines like fashion and retail and stuff like that, sometimes aren't necessarily there to have people do that. So it's been more of a greasing of the wheel in order to facilitate continuous job searching, really. So going on Canada website today, I was able to really look, like what you were saying earlier, for the grants from 1,000 to 5,000. I didn't even know that existed. So it's, how should I put it? It's warming, and it's kind of, it gives me more of confidence going into this, because I said that there are more options than I previously thought there were for me to kind of bounce back or kind of land on my feet depending on where I want to step next. But it's been a learning curve and more of an adaptability. So.
Yeah, sometimes we have to proactively go out to search for the information. It's not delivered to us, and we've got to learn. We've got to learn to do that. And so please let everyone that they need to proactively go out and search, or at least email their representatives so that we can reply back with some links and information for them. But we are very fortunate to be Canadian. We do have our challenges. Not saying everything is perfect and our job is done, but in terms of the supports that have been provided, they have far outweighed what people have received in other countries. So we are a compassionate country, and hopefully we will continue to go that way, but it's something we have to work at all the time. And especially, we know right now we're not just in the middle of a pandemic, but in the middle of a civil rights movement of some kind as well. And so we know we can do much better in that area as well. And we recognize our flaws, and recognizing it is important, but coming up with proactive solutions and things we can do to improve those issues, those are what we're looking at as well when it comes to making sure that we have an inclusive country, and we continue to work towards that. And that is something we can't just necessarily take for granted. It's something we do have to strive towards and work towards every day. So thank you for your part in that, and for all the Bramptonians and Canadians that have been, opening everyone's eyes.
100%. And I think it's very important during this time to not only lean on our own understanding, but to lean on the understandings of others, and, just experience that we're seeing globally and throughout Canada as well. So in the coming months, I can only hope and I anticipate a positive turn, both in the economic standpoint and both when it comes to the safety and the health of Canadians as well. So I'm optimistic, but you've covered more questions. I'm so happy and thrilled that I got to speak to you today, and you opened my eyes, and I'm sure the eyes of many viewers today, as to the next steps that they can take and their role leading Canada into a brighter future. So thank you.
Yeah, be engaged. Politics does matter. The governments you choose are important. It is important to get civically engaged, and I am seeing that more and more young people are realizing that more than ever before. It seems like there's been progress on that, and people are really saying, people recognizing that if you don't exercise your civic duty, your civic rights, then you may lose them, and it has a negative impact when you don't speak up. And so I'm quite proud of Canadians and a lot of young people all over the world that are speaking up right now. And I think they're making us realize different ways to deal with many different societal issues, whether it is economic, socioeconomic, and so many other issues. They have a different way of looking at things, and so challenging us and opening our eyes is really important. You can't do that if you're sitting at home quiet, right? You've got to speak up, and the best way to speak up is to get civically engaged, to vote. It's really important, and it's not, I'm not just saying this as a politician. It's something I believed way before I got into politics. It's something, I myself looked forward to the day I turned 18, but it is so important, because if you're not seen as a demographic that elects governments, while governments may not see that demographic as something to worry about, or their concerns to be looked at. And it's sad to say, of course, I think good governments are always trying to work for all people. But of course, you know, at the end of the day, politics is politics. And oftentimes we do catch ourselves saying, well, you know, we've got to do something for seniors vote. We've got to do something for this class, you know. And so you do hear yourself say that sometimes, and then you recognize that, you know, well, that could become something that we're constantly saying about young people. Oh my goodness, you know, we've got to make sure this is in place for young people. Young people, youth vote, right? But that's not something that's usually said. So, but yet there are a lot of programs for young people. So I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that there would be a lot more. And I think you'd realize how much power you have if that was also put into practice just as much.
From personal experience and just from that of my friends too, I definitely support exactly what you said, because we all have a voice, we all have a platform, and if we don't use it, we will eventually lose it 100% in one way, shape, or form. So I think that personally, with the time that was allotted to us during this quarantine, a lot, speaking for myself, have educated themselves with regards to possible avenues that just for the power we have or socioeconomic.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for you taking time out today to have this conversation with me.
It was blessed time, and thank you very much. And I look forward to following your tweets a little bit more and seeing what nextcanada.com or .ca, I should say, canada.ca, has in store for Canadians and youth coming up through this. So, again,
absolutely. And email your MP, your MPP, or your city councillors about issues. Write to them. And with social media, there's, you know, an even quicker way for you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, until next time, you have a great time, okay?
Thank you. Take care. Bye.